My name is Martha, and I'm 35 years old. Last Saturday was supposed to be one of those perfect family moments we all treasure. Mom's 65th birthday party was everything we'd planned. The chocolate cake I'd spent hours perfecting the living room, decorated with photos spanning decades of memories, and that warm golden light filtering through the curtains of the house where I grew up. Everyone was laughing, sharing stories, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely happy. My 10-year-old daughter Emily was staying at her friend Linda's house for a sleepover, giving us adults some rare, uninterrupted time together. But even in that moment of joy, something felt slightly off, like a shadow I couldn't quite place. Then my phone rang at 9:15, and Emily's trembling voice shattered everything. "Mom, get out of the house. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button." You won't believe what my 10-year-old daughter discovered that night that ended up saving my life. To understand why that phone call changed everything you need to know about the life I'd been trying to rebuild. 2 years ago, I finally found the courage to divorce my husband Frank after enduring years of emotional abuse and discovering his affair with a coworker. The divorce was brutal. Frank contested everything from custody arrangements to our modest savings account. He turned friends against me, convinced people I was being unreasonable, and made every legal proceeding feel like warfare. But through it all, my mother Dorothy stood by me like a rock. She was the only family member who truly understood what I'd been through behind closed doors. I work as a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital, pulling long shifts to support Emily and myself in our small but cozy apartment across town. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work that gives me purpose and helps me sleep at night, knowing I'm building something stable for my daughter. Emily is everything to me. Bright, curious, and surprisingly mature for her age. She adjusted to the divorce better than I expected, though I know she still struggles with missing the idea of having both parents together. My relationship with my older brother Gerald and his wife Joan had grown strained since the divorce. They always seemed to think I was too harsh on Frank, too unforgiving about his mistakes. Gerald would make comments about how marriage requires compromise, how maybe I should have tried harder to work things out for Emily's sake. Joan would nod along, suggesting that Frank wasn't really that bad, and that all marriages have their rough patches. Their attitude hurt more than they realized, making me feel isolated even within my own family. But Mom's house had always been my sanctuary. The Victorian-style home on Maple Street where I grew up still smelled like her lavender soap and fresh-baked bread. Every corner held memories of bedtime stories, scraped knees being bandaged, and long talks at the kitchen table. When she suggested having her birthday party there instead of going out to a restaurant, I was thrilled. It felt like a chance to reconnect with the warmth and security I'd been missing since my world fell apart. The party planning had been simple but heartfelt. I'd made her favorite chocolate layer cake with cream cheese frosting, the recipe she'd taught me when I was Emily's age. Gerald brought flowers and a bottle of her favorite wine, while Joan prepared a beautiful fruit salad. We'd scattered old family photos across the coffee table, creating a timeline of birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments that suddenly seemed precious. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. The evening started exactly as we'd hoped. Mom looked radiant in her navy blue dress, the one that brought out her eyes and made her look 10 years younger. She'd spent extra time on her hair and makeup, clearly excited about celebrating with her children. We gathered around the dining room table with its familiar lace tablecloth, the same one she'd used for special occasions throughout my childhood. The candles on her cake flickered warmly as we sang Happy Birthday, our voices harmonizing in the way that only family can. Gerald was in fine form, telling stories about our childhood that had us all laughing until our sides hurt. He reminded us about the time I tried to give the dog a haircut and ended up with patches of fur all over the backyard. Joan complimented my cooking repeatedly, asking for the cake recipe and praising the seasoning on the roast beef. Mom opened her gifts with genuine delight, especially the photo album I'd compiled of Emily's school events and achievements. Everything felt normal, comfortable, and exactly how a family celebration should be. But as the evening progressed, I began noticing small things that didn't quite fit. Gerald kept glancing at his watch, checking the time with an urgency that seemed odd for such a relaxed gathering. When I asked if he needed to be somewhere, he brushed off my concern, claiming he was just making sure we didn't keep Mom up too late. Joan excused herself multiple times to take what she called work calls, stepping out onto the front porch and speaking in hushed tones. Since when did her part-time job at the dentist's office require evening consultations, most unsettling was Mom's behavior. Despite her smiles and laughter, I caught glimpses of worry in her eyes, especially when she thought no one was looking. She seemed distracted, fidgeting with her napkin and asking the same questions twice. When I directly asked if everything was all right, she assured me it was just the excitement of having everyone together. But I knew my mother, and something was definitely troubling her. The first really strange moment happened around 8:30. The phone rang, which wasn't unusual, but when I offered to answer it, Gerald practically lunged for the receiver. He picked up on the third ring, said hello, listened for a moment, then hung up without saying another word. When I asked who it was, he claimed it was a wrong number. But I'd seen him and Joan exchange a look that lasted just a second too long, the kind of meaningful glance that passes between people sharing a secret. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly after that call. The conversations became a little more forced, the laughter a little less natural. I felt like I was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me. Gerald and Joan seemed to be communicating through subtle nods and gestures, while Mom appeared increasingly uncomfortable, despite her attempts to maintain the celebratory mood. At 9:15, my cell phone buzzed with Emily's name on the screen. I expected to hear about her sleepover adventures, or maybe a request to come home early. Instead, my daughter's voice was tight with fear, speaking in the rapid, breathless way children do when they're trying not to cry. "Mom, you need to get out of Grandma's house right now," she said, the words tumbling over each other. My first instinct was to assume she was being dramatic the way kids sometimes are. Maybe she'd had a nightmare, or watched something scary on television. "Sweetie, what's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "Did you have a bad dream? Do you want me to come pick you up?" "No, Mom. You don't understand." Emily's voice cracked with urgency. "Please trust me. Something bad is going to happen. You have to get out of there right now." She was crying now, the kind of deep, frightened sobs that told me this wasn't childhood imagination or attention-seeking behavior. This was genuine terror. I stepped into the hallway for privacy, pressing the phone closer to my ear. "Emily, take a deep breath and tell me exactly what happened. What makes you think something bad is going to happen?" My nurse's training kicked in, helping me stay calm, even as my heart began racing. Through her tears, Emily explained that she'd been in Linda's kitchen getting a glass of water when she overheard Linda's father on the phone. Linda's dad, it turned out, was an old friend of Frank's from their construction work days. Emily had recognized Frank's voice on the speakerphone, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Frank was telling Linda's father that tonight is the night, and she won't see it coming. He'd mentioned something about making sure I was at Mom's house and that everything was set up perfectly. Emily had always been observant beyond her years, a trait that sometimes worried me, but now might be saving my life. She'd hidden behind the kitchen door, listening as Frank discussed timing and logistics with someone I'd trusted as a family friend. When Linda's father asked if Frank was sure about going through with it, Frank had laughed in that cold way I remembered from our worst fights, and said I'd never bother him again after tonight. My daughter had waited until Linda's family was distracted by a movie before sneaking into the guest room to call me. She was whispering now, terrified that someone might discover her eavesdropping. "Mom, I don't know what he's planning, but he sounded really scary. Please just leave Grandma's house and go somewhere safe." As Emily spoke, puzzle pieces began clicking into place in my mind. Gerald's constant clock watching, Joan's mysterious phone calls, Mom's nervous energy, that strange hang-up call earlier. I felt physically sick as I realized that my own family might be involved in whatever Frank had planned. But Emily's voice brought me back to the immediate danger. I tried calling Grandma's house first, but no one answered, Emily continued. That's when I called your cell phone. Mom, I'm scared. What if something happens to you? Her voice broke completely and I could hear her trying to muffle her sobs so Linda's family wouldn't hear. I told Emily I loved her and would call her back as soon as I could, then hung up with my hands shaking. Standing in Mom's familiar hallway surrounded by family photos and childhood memories, I felt the walls closing in around me. Everything I'd thought I knew about my support system was crumbling, and I had to figure out who I could trust and how to get out safely. My first instinct was to march back into the living room and confront Gerald directly, but Emily's terrified voice echoed in my mind. If Frank really was planning something dangerous, and if my brother was somehow involved, then revealing what I knew could make things worse. I needed more information before making any moves. I pretended to use the bathroom and locked the door behind me, then tried calling Emily back on my cell phone. She answered on the first ring, still whispering. Mom, are you okay? Are you still at Grandma's house? Yes, baby. I'm still here. I need you to tell me everything else you heard. Okay, every detail you can remember. I kept my voice low, acutely aware that the bathroom shared a wall with the living room where my family was sitting. Emily took a shaky breath and continued her story. Yesterday after school, I was supposed to stay at the aftercare program, but they called you at work because I had a stomachache, remember? And you couldn't leave your shift, so Uncle Gerald picked me up instead. I did remember. Gerald had offered to help when I couldn't get away from the hospital, and I'd been grateful for his support. When we got to Uncle Gerald's house, I was lying down in the guest room because my stomach still hurt. Uncle Gerald thought I was asleep, but I heard him talking to someone on the phone in the kitchen. It was Daddy. Emily's voice got smaller as she continued. Daddy was asking if you would definitely be at Grandma's birthday party, and Uncle Gerald said yes, that you'd probably stay until at least 10 o'clock, because you always help clean up after parties. My heart sank as Emily described hearing Frank ask Gerald about the layout of Mom's house, specifically about which doors would be unlocked and whether there were any security cameras. Gerald had answered every question, even mentioning that Mom always left her back door unlocked because she felt safe in her neighborhood. Then Daddy said something about teaching you a lesson and making you pay for taking me away from him. He talked about insurance money and how much easier everything would be after tonight. Emily was crying again, but she pushed through to give me every detail. Uncle Gerald said Aunt Joan was nervous about the plan, but that she'd keep quiet because they needed the money Daddy promised them. The full scope of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Gerald wasn't just passively allowing something to happen. He was actively helping Frank plan it. Joan knew about it too, which explained her nervous phone calls, an inability to meet my eyes tonight. And the target wasn't just me. They were talking about insurance money, which meant they were planning something permanent. After my divorce, I'd taken out a life insurance policy to make sure Emily would be provided for if anything happened to me. Frank had always resented that he wasn't the beneficiary, arguing that as Emily's father, he should have control over any money meant for her care. At the time, I thought his anger was just another example of his controlling nature. Now I realized it might have planted the seed for something much darker. Emily's voice brought me back to the present. Mom, there's more. I heard Daddy say that it had to look like an accident, and that Uncle Gerald knew exactly how to make that happen. They talked about the old furnace in Grandma's basement, and something about gas leaks being so tragic and unpredictable. The words gas leak sent ice through my veins. Mom's house was old, built in the 1940s with original fixtures that she'd been meaning to update for years. The basement furnace was ancient, the kind of system that could legitimately malfunction and cause a devastating accident. If Frank had convinced Gerald to tamper with it, they could kill everyone in the house and make it look like a tragic accident. I forced myself to think clearly despite the panic threatening to overwhelm me. Emily was safe at Linda's house, but Mom was downstairs with Gerald and Joan, completely unaware of the danger. I had to get her out without alerting Gerald to what I knew, but I also couldn't waste time. If Frank was coming tonight, he might already be on his way. Through the bathroom door, I could hear the murmur of conversation from the living room. Gerald's voice carried clearly as he told another childhood story, sounding completely normal and relaxed. The casual tone made my skin crawl. How could he sit there making small talk with Mom while planning to kill us both? I quietly opened the bathroom door and crept toward the top of the basement stairs. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see that the basement light was on. That was strange. None of us had any reason to go down there tonight. As I listened, I heard the faint sound of metal clinking against metal, like someone working with tools. My blood ran cold as I realized Frank might already be in the house in the basement sabotaging the furnace while Gerald kept Mom and Joan distracted upstairs. The timeline Emily had overheard was happening faster than I'd expected. I backed away from the basement door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I needed to get Mom alone and convince her to leave without creating suspicion. But as I walked back toward the living room, I heard a car door slam outside. Through the front window, I could see Frank's pickup truck parked at the curb, along with another vehicle I didn't recognize. Two men I'd never seen before were walking up the front path with Frank, all three of them moving with the purposeful stride of people on a mission. The metallic sounds from the basement stopped abruptly, replaced by footsteps on the stairs. Someone had been down there, and now they were coming back up. I had seconds to decide what to do. Running for the back door might save me, but it would leave Mom defenseless. Confronting them directly would only confirm that I knew about their plan. And calling the police would take too long. They were already here. Emily's voice echoed in my memory. Get out of the house. But I couldn't abandon my mother, not when she had no idea what was happening. I had to find a way to save us both, even though I was outnumbered and trapped in a house that was supposed to be my childhood sanctuary. Frank walked through the front door without knocking, as if he still belonged there. He looked exactly as I remembered. Average height, thinning brown hair, and that cold smile that never reached his eyes. But now there was something else in his expression, a confidence that made my stomach turn. Behind him were two men I didn't recognize, both large and intimidating, wearing work clothes that suggested they weren't here for a social visit. Well, well, Frank said, his voice carrying that false friendliness I remembered from our worst fights. Look at this nice family gathering. Hope you don't mind me dropping by Dorothy. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd pay my respects on your special day. Mom looked genuinely surprised and pleased to see him, which broke my heart. She'd always had a soft spot for Frank, remembering the charming man he'd been during our early courtship, rather than the controlling husband he'd become. Frank, what a lovely surprise. We were just finishing up cake. Would you like a piece? Gerald's reaction was the most telling. He didn't look surprised at all. Instead, he appeared nervous, like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. Frank, good to see you, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Joan barely looked up from her plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on Mom's china. Actually, Dorothy, I was hoping to have a word with Martha, Frank said, his eyes never leaving mine. We have some things to discuss about Emily's custody arrangement. I think it's time we worked out a more permanent solution. The two men with him positioned themselves casually but strategically, one near the front door, another by the entrance to the kitchen. They weren't being obvious about it, but they were clearly blocking the main exits. I felt like prey being circled by predators, except these predators included my own brother. Frank, this isn't really the time or place, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's Mom's birthday party. Whatever you want to discuss can wait until tomorrow. I was buying time, trying to figure out how to get Mom away from the danger without revealing that I knew what was really happening. Frank's smile widened, and I saw a flash of the cruelty I'd learned to fear during our marriage. Oh, I think tonight is perfect, Martha. In fact, I think it's exactly the right time for us to settle all our differences once and for all. He turned to Mom with exaggerated politeness. Dorothy, would it be all right if Martha and I stepped outside for a few minutes? We have some private family business to discuss. I could see Mom wavering, her natural inclination toward hospitality, conflicting with her protective instincts toward me. She knew Frank and I had a contentious relationship, but she had no idea how dangerous he'd become. "Well, I suppose that would be fine," she said hesitantly. "But maybe you could wait until after we finish celebrating. It is my birthday after all." That's when Frank dropped the pretense entirely. "I'm afraid this can't wait, Dorothy. You see, Martha has been keeping some secrets from all of you. Haven't you, Martha?" His voice took on the hard edge I remembered from our worst fights. "She's been making plans that affect Emily's future, making decisions without consulting me as her father. I think it's time everyone knew the truth about what kind of mother she really is." Gerald finally spoke up, and his words confirmed my worst fears. "Frank has a point, Martha. Maybe it's time you stopped being so selfish and thought about what's best for Emily." The brother who had protected me from bullies in elementary school, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework, was now actively helping my abusive ex-husband corner me in our mother's living room. Joan was staring at her hands, unable or unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Mom looked confused and increasingly worried, sensing the undercurrents of hostility, but not understanding what was really happening. The two strangers Frank had brought were watching everything with professional detachment, like security guards waiting for instructions. Frank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out some folded papers. "I've been doing some research, Martha. Did you know that if something were to happen to you, Emily's custody would automatically revert to me, and that life insurance policy you took out as Emily's guardian, I'd have control over that money until she turns 18. He unfolded the papers, revealing what looked like legal documents. "I've already filed the preliminary paperwork. All we need now is for you to sign over guardianship voluntarily or for circumstances to change in a way that makes the transfer automatic." The meaning behind Frank's words hit me like a sledgehammer. He wasn't just planning to hurt me. He was planning to kill me and make it look like an accident so he could claim custody of Emily and control her inheritance. The insurance money I'd set aside to protect my daughter would instead fund the life of the man who destroyed our family. But Emily's warning had given me something Frank didn't expect: advanced knowledge of his plan and time to think. While he was making his threats, and Gerald was playing his part in the charade, I was calculating distances to exits and formulating a strategy. The back door was closest, but I'd have to get past Joan to reach it. The front door was blocked by one of Frank's companions, but there was a third option Frank might not have considered. "You know what, Frank?" I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been selfish, keeping Emily from her father and making decisions without consulting you." Gerald looked relieved, probably thinking his part in this nightmare was almost over. Joan glanced up hopefully, as if my apparent surrender might make her guilt easier to bear. Frank's eyes narrowed suspiciously. He knew me well enough to recognize that I didn't give up easily. "What exactly are you saying, Martha?" "I'm saying maybe we should discuss this properly away from Mom so we don't ruin her birthday any more than we already have." I looked directly at Frank, projecting the resignation I didn't feel. "You want to talk about Emily's future? Fine. Let's go outside and talk." I could see Frank weighing his options. His original plan had probably involved cornering me inside the house, maybe in the basement near whatever sabotage he'd arranged. But my apparent willingness to cooperate was throwing him off script. "Outside sounds perfect," he said finally. "We'll have more privacy there." As we moved toward the back door, I caught Mom's arm gently. "Mom, why don't you come with us? As Emily's grandmother, you should probably hear this discussion too." I was hoping to get her out of the house without triggering Frank's suspicions, but Gerald immediately objected. "That's not necessary, Mom," Gerald said quickly. "This is between Frank and Martha. Besides, Joan and I will keep you company while they sort things out." He was trying to keep Mom inside, which confirmed that the house itself was part of the trap. "Actually, I think Martha's right," Mom said, surprising everyone. "If this involves Emily, then I want to hear what you have to say, Frank. She's my granddaughter, and I have a right to know what's being planned for her future." Mom's stubborn streak was showing, and for once I was grateful for her determination to be involved in family decisions. Frank looked frustrated, but he couldn't argue with Mom's logic without revealing his true intentions. Fine, he said curtly. Everyone outside then. Let's get this settled once and for all. As we moved toward the back door, I caught sight of the basement door standing wide open. In the brief moment when no one was looking directly at me, I managed to send a quick text message to Emily. Call 911 now. Send to Grandma's address. Tell them emergency in progress. I hit send and slipped the phone back into my pocket, just as Frank turned to check on me. The backyard was exactly as I remembered from childhood. A large space with Mom's flower garden along one side, and a low wooden fence separating it from the neighbor's property. More importantly, it was where Mrs. Henderson next door liked to sit on her porch in the evenings, and where the streetlight from the alley provided enough illumination for neighbors to see what was happening. Frank's two companions positioned themselves strategically again, but the open space gave me more options than the confines of the house. Gerald and Joan flanked Mom ostensibly to support her, but really to control her movements. Frank stood directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath and see the cold calculation in his eyes. Now then, Martha, Frank said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I remembered from our worst arguments. Let's discuss your future, or rather your lack of one. Frank's mask finally slipped completely. Standing in Mom's backyard under the pale glow of the streetlight, he looked exactly like the man who had terrorized me behind closed doors for years, cold, calculating, and absolutely certain of his control over the situation. But this time, I wasn't the same frightened woman who had endured his abuse in silence. Here's how this is going to work. Frank continued, his voice low but carrying clearly in the still night air. Gerald has been very helpful in explaining the layout of your mother's house, especially that old furnace in the basement. Amazing how those vintage heating systems can malfunction so suddenly and so catastrophically. He smiled as he spoke, enjoying the fear he expected to see in my eyes. Mom gasped, beginning to understand that this wasn't a custody discussion at all. Frank, what are you talking about? What does my furnace have to do with anything? She looked between Frank and Gerald, confusion and dawning horror warring in her expression. Gerald wouldn't meet her eyes. Mom, just stay quiet, okay? This will all be over soon, and then things will be better for everyone. His voice cracked as he spoke, and I could see the weight of his betrayal crushing him even as he committed to it. Joan was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she realized there was no going back from what they'd set in motion. She'd probably convinced herself that they were just going to scare me, that Frank wouldn't actually go through with anything permanent. Now she was seeing the reality of what she'd helped orchestrate. Frank pulled out his cell phone and made a quick call. Yeah, it's me. Light it up. He hung up and smiled at me with genuine pleasure. My friend in the basement just activated a little device I had installed on your mother's furnace. In about 10 minutes, this whole house is going to experience a tragic gas explosion. Old houses, you know. So unpredictable. The full horror of his plan became clear. He intended to kill all of us and make it look like an accident, eliminating me while removing any witnesses to his involvement. Emily would become an orphan, automatically reverting to his custody along with the insurance money. Gerald and Joan were supposed to be his alibis, but now I realized they were just loose ends he planned to eliminate as well. But Frank had made one critical error. He'd underestimated both me and my daughter. While he'd been gloating and explaining his plan, precious seconds had been ticking by. Emily's call to 911 would bring help, but I needed to buy us time and get everyone away from the house before it exploded. I thought about the layout of Mom's backyard, remembering every detail from my childhood. The fence was about 4 feet high, easily climbable. Mrs. Henderson's porch light was on next door, which meant she was probably still awake. If I could create enough commotion to alert the neighbors and get everyone moving toward safety, we might survive this. You know what, Frank? I said loud enough for anyone nearby to hear clearly. You're absolutely right about one thing. This ends tonight, but not the way you planned. Before he could react, I grabbed the metal patio chair beside me and threw it as hard as I could at Mom's back window. The crash of breaking glass shattered the quiet evening and sent the unmistakable message that something violent was happening. Frank lunged toward me, but I was already moving. "Mom, run to the fence," I shouted. "The house is going to explode. Everyone needs to get away from the house right now." I pushed her toward the back fence as hard as I could, hoping her survival instincts would override her confusion. Gerald tried to grab me, probably still thinking he could salvage the situation somehow. "Martha, stop. You don't understand what you're doing." But I spun away from him and kicked over Mom's heavy ceramic planter, sending it crashing into the sliding glass door. More noise, more evidence of a struggle, more reason for neighbors to call for help. Joan was screaming now, the reality of the situation finally breaking through her denial. "Gerald, we have to get out of here. If the house explodes, we'll die too." She was pulling at his arm, trying to drag him towards safety, but he seemed frozen by indecision. Frank's two companions were moving toward me, but the chaos I'd created was working in my favor. In the confusion of breaking glass and shouting voices, I managed to reach the fence and boost myself up onto it. "The house is going to explode," I yelled toward Mrs. Henderson's porch, hoping she could hear me. "Call 911, gas leak, emergency." From my perch on the fence, I could see the full scope of the disaster Frank had orchestrated. Smoke was beginning to seep from Mom's basement windows, confirming that whatever device he'd had installed was working exactly as planned. The house where I'd grown up, where I'd felt safe and loved, was about to become our tomb unless we could get everyone to safety in the next few minutes. Mom had finally grasped the seriousness of the situation and was climbing the fence with surprising agility for a woman her age. Fear had given her strength and coordination she didn't know she possessed. "Martha, what's happening?" she called to me as she struggled over the wooden barrier. "Why would Frank want to hurt us?" "I'll explain everything later, Mom," I shouted back, jumping down into Mrs. Henderson's yard and turning to help her down. "Right now, we just need to get as far from the house as possible." Mrs. Henderson's porch light had indeed come on, and I could see her silhouette in the window phone pressed to her ear. Thank God for nosy neighbors who paid attention to unusual sounds. Behind us, Gerald was finally moving toward the fence, dragging a hysterical Joan with him. I could see the internal struggle on his face. The brother who had once protected me was fighting with the desperate man who had betrayed me for money. "Martha, I'm sorry," he called out as he helped Joan climb over. "I never wanted it to go this far. Frank said he just wanted to scare you, make you agree to shared custody." Frank and his two companions were retreating from the house as well, but they were moving with less urgency than the rest of us. They knew exactly how much time they had before the explosion, and Frank was still trying to control the narrative. "Everyone stay calm," he called out in a voice meant to sound authoritative. "This is just a gas leak. These things happen in old houses. Very tragic, but completely accidental." That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens in the distance getting closer by the second. Emily had come through for us. My 10-year-old daughter had not only detected the danger, but had taken action to save our lives while the adults around her were falling apart or actively plotting murder. Frank heard the sirens too, and his demeanor changed instantly. The confident predator became a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. "Everyone shut up," he snarled, pulling what looked like a gun from his jacket. "Nobody says anything to the cops about what happened here. This was an accident, do you understand? A tragic gas leak that we were all lucky to escape from." Gerald was staring at the gun in horror. "Frank, what are you doing? You said nobody would get hurt. You said it would just look like an accident." He was finally understanding that he'd been played, that Frank had never intended for any of us to survive as witnesses. "Plans change, Gerald," Frank replied coldly. "Sometimes you have to adapt to unexpected circumstances, like nosy little girls who don't know when to mind their own business." The threat against Emily was clear, and it filled me with a rage I'd never experienced before. The smoke from the house was getting thicker, and I could smell gas mixing with the acrid scent of whatever chemicals Frank had used to accelerate the process. We had minutes at most before the explosion, but now Frank was armed and desperate. The police sirens were getting closer, but they might not arrive in time to prevent him from shooting us all and claiming we died in the blast. but as I watched Frank trying to control a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control, I realized something important. He'd planned for a quiet, contained murder that would look like an accident. He hadn't planned for neighbors calling 911 police sirens, or having to manage multiple witnesses while holding a gun in full view of anyone who might be watching from nearby houses. Mrs. Henderson's porch was fully lit now, and I could see her talking animatedly on the phone, undoubtedly giving the 911 dispatcher a detailed description of everything she was witnessing. Other neighbors were coming outside, too, drawn by the noise and the smell of smoke. Frank's accidental gas leak was turning into a very public crime scene with multiple witnesses. The first police car arrived just as the smoke from Mom's house became thick enough to obscure the basement windows completely. Officer Rodriguez, I recognized him from Emily's school safety presentations, stepped out with his hand resting on his service weapon, taking in the scene with trained eyes. Behind him, a fire truck was pulling up, and I could hear more sirens approaching from different directions. Frank still had his gun out, but he was trying to conceal it while maintaining control over our group. The arrival of multiple emergency responders had clearly thrown off whatever backup plan he'd been formulating. "Officer," he called out in his most reasonable voice. "Thank God you're here. We were having a family gathering when we smelled gas. I think there might be a leak in the basement." Officer Rodriguez nodded but kept scanning the group, his experienced gaze picking up on the tension and fear that went beyond concern about a gas leak. "Everyone needs to move further back from the house," he said firmly. "Fire department will handle the gas situation. How many people were inside when you noticed the problem?" "Just the family," Frank replied smoothly. "We all got out safely, thank goodness. Though I'm worried about the house. It's been in the family for decades." He was playing the concerned family member perfectly, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Mom stepped forward before I could stop her. "Officer, I don't think this was an accident," she said in her clear, firm voice. "This man was just telling us about some device in my basement, and he made a phone call that he said would light it up. I think someone deliberately damaged my furnace." Frank's face went white, then red with anger. "Dorothy, you're confused. The shock of the situation has you mixed up about what happened. I was just trying to help everyone get to safety." But Officer Rodriguez was already calling for backup and requesting the fire department to treat this as a potential arson scene rather than an accident. Gerald chose that moment to completely fall apart. "It's true," he sobbed, dropping to his knees in Mrs. Henderson's backyard. "Frank planned the whole thing. He wanted to kill Martha and make it look like an accident so he could get custody of Emily and the insurance money. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry, Martha. He promised me money and Joan and I are behind on our mortgage and I thought maybe he was just going to scare you." Joan was nodding through her tears, confirming Gerald's confession. "We never meant for anyone to die," she wailed. "Frank said he just wanted to teach Martha a lesson about keeping Emily from him. We didn't know he was really planning to... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Frank realized his situation had become untenable. With Gerald and Joan confessing and Mom contradicting his story, his only options were surrender or escalation. Unfortunately, he chose escalation. "Everyone shut up!" he screamed, raising the gun so everyone could see it clearly. "Nobody says another word, or I start shooting right here in front of God and the cops and everyone." But Officer Rodriguez was already in motion, speaking rapidly into his radio, while positioning himself to protect the civilians. The firefighters who had been approaching the house immediately shifted into tactical mode, using their truck as cover while they established a perimeter. More police cars were arriving, and I could see officers taking positions around Mrs. Henderson's property. In the distance, I heard another siren that sounded different from the others. An ambulance, probably. Someone had called in reports of injured people, which meant Emily's 911 call had been taken seriously, and a full emergency response was underway. My brilliant daughter had not only detected the danger and warned me in time, but she'd also triggered exactly the kind of multi-agency response that would make it impossible for Frank to cover up his crimes. Frank was looking around wildly now, realizing that his carefully planned murder had turned into a very public hostage situation with law enforcement witnesses. His two companions had melted away during the chaos, probably deciding that whatever Frank was paying them wasn't worth a lifetime in prison. He was alone, trapped, and desperate. "This is all Martha's fault," he shouted at the gathering crowd of officers and firefighters. "She turned my own daughter against me. She poisoned Emily's mind and kept her away from her father. All I wanted was my rights as a parent." He was ranting now, revealing the twisted logic that had justified attempted murder in his mind. That's when the basement windows of Mom's house finally gave way. The explosion wasn't as dramatic as what you might see in movies. More of a deep rumbling whoomph, followed by flames beginning to lick at the foundation. But it was real, and it would have killed everyone inside if we'd still been trapped in the house when it happened. The sound seemed to break something in Frank's psyche. He stared at the burning house with a mixture of satisfaction and horror, as if he was seeing the physical manifestation of his own moral collapse. "She deserved it," he whispered, then louder. "She deserved everything that happened to her." Officer Rodriguez took advantage of Frank's distraction to move closer. "Sir, I need you to put the weapon down and step away from the civilians. Nobody else needs to get hurt tonight." His voice was calm and professional, but I could see the tension in his posture as he prepared for whatever Frank might do next. What happened next unfolded like a choreographed dance of law enforcement training and desperate criminal behavior. Frank swung the gun toward Officer Rodriguez, but years of police work had prepared the officer for exactly that move. As Frank's attention focused on the immediate threat of the armed officer, I saw my opportunity and took it. "Emily sends her love," I called out to Frank loud enough for everyone to hear. The mention of our daughter's name caused him to turn toward me for just a split second, but that was all Officer Rodriguez needed. He closed the distance between them and tackled Frank to the ground before the gun could be fired. The weapon discharged once as they struggled, but the bullet went harmlessly into Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes. Within seconds, 3 more officers had joined the pile, and Frank was secured in handcuffs while medics checked him for injuries. His 2 companions, who had been trying to slip away through the crowd of emergency responders, were apprehended 2 blocks away after a brief foot chase. Gerald and Joan were also placed in custody, though their handcuffs looked more like a formality than a necessity. Both of them were completely broken by what they'd participated in, and they provided detailed confessions to the detectives who arrived to process the scene. Gerald kept repeating that he'd never meant for anyone to die, while Joan sobbed about how desperately they'd needed the money Frank had promised them. The fire department managed to contain the blaze to Mom's basement and part of the first floor, but the house was a total loss. Decades of family memories went up in smoke because of one man's twisted need for control and revenge. As I stood in Mrs. Henderson's backyard watching my childhood home burn, I felt a complex mixture of grief and relief. We'd lost the building, but we'd saved the people who mattered most. Officer Rodriguez approached me as the scene began to wind down. "Ma'am, we're going to need detailed statements from everyone, but I wanted you to know that your daughter's 911 call probably saved multiple lives tonight. She gave our dispatcher very specific information about the threat and the location, and she stayed on the line to answer questions until we arrived. That little girl showed remarkable courage and intelligence under pressure." I felt tears streaming down my face as I thought about Emily safe at Linda's house, but undoubtedly terrified about what was happening to her family. "Can I call her?" I asked. "She must be so scared, and I need her to know we're all okay." "Of course," Officer Rodriguez replied. "But first, I have some good news for you. We've been investigating your ex-husband for several months based on reports from other women he'd been involved with since your divorce. Tonight's events give us everything we need to file attempted murder charges, along with arson, conspiracy, and weapons violations. He's going to prison for a very long time." The relief I felt was indescribable. For 2 years, I'd lived with the constant fear that Frank would find new ways to hurt me or take Emily away. Now, finally, we would be truly free from his threats and manipulation. The nightmare that had begun with emotional abuse during our marriage was ending with his arrest for attempted murder. Mom came over and put her arms around me, both of us shaking from exhaustion and delayed shock. "I'm so sorry, honey," she whispered. "I had no idea Gerald was involved in something like this. I should have seen the signs, should have protected you better." "Mom, this isn't your fault," I assured her. "Gerald made his own choices, and Frank manipulated all of us. What matters is that we survived, and now Emily will grow up knowing she's safe from him." We held each other as the last of the flames were extinguished and the scene began to clear. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had been interviewing witnesses, approached us with a clipboard full of paperwork. "Mrs. Collins, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement, but I wanted to update you on what we've learned tonight. Based on your brother's confession and evidence we found in your ex-husband's truck, this was a premeditated murder plot that's been in planning for several weeks." She explained that Frank had recruited Gerald by convincing him that I was planning to move out of state with Emily, cutting off all contact with their side of the family. Gerald's financial problems had made him vulnerable to Frank's promises of easy money, and Joan had gone along because she was afraid of losing their house to foreclosure. "The device in your mother's basement was sophisticated," Detective Martinez continued. "It was designed to cause an explosion that would look like a furnace malfunction, but our arson investigators found clear evidence of tampering. Your ex-husband had help from someone with professional knowledge of heating systems and explosives." I thought about Frank's two companions and wondered what other crimes they might have been involved in. How many other women had Frank targeted? How many other families had he tried to destroy when he couldn't maintain control over them? 3 hours later, I was finally able to call Emily from the police station. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the exhaustion and worry in her young voice. "Mom, are you okay? Is Grandma okay? What happened to the house?" "We're all safe, baby," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "The house burned down, but everyone got out in time because you warned us. You saved our lives tonight by being so brave and smart." I could hear her crying on the other end of the line, and my heart broke for what my little girl had been forced to endure. "I was so scared, Mom," Emily sobbed. "When I heard Daddy talking about hurting you, I didn't know what to do. Linda's parents wanted to call you, but I was afraid that if Daddy knew I'd hurt him, he might hurt you even worse." The fact that a 10-year-old child had to make those kinds of calculations about adult violence filled me with rage all over again. "You did exactly the right thing," I assured her. "You were smart and careful and brave, and because of you, Daddy can never hurt any of us again. The police arrested him tonight, and he's going to prison for a very long time." I explained as gently as I could that Uncle Gerald and Aunt Joan had been arrested too, and that our family would look very different going forward. Emily was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd told her. "Mom, does this mean we don't have to be afraid anymore? Does this mean Daddy can't try to take me away from you?" The hope in her voice was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart," I said. "We're free now. We can build whatever kind of life we want without worrying about Daddy trying to hurt us or control us. It's going to take some time to figure everything out, but we're going to be okay." Linda's mother got on the phone to coordinate picking Emily up and bringing her to the police station. She'd been wonderful throughout the crisis, keeping Emily calm and safe, while also facilitating her communication with law enforcement. I made a mental note to find a way to thank her properly once we got through the immediate aftermath. Detective Martinez finished taking my statement around 2 in the morning. The formal charges against Frank included attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, weapons violations, and stalking. Gerald and Joan were charged with conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder, though the detective indicated they would probably receive lighter sentences in exchange for their cooperation with the prosecution. "One more thing," Detective Martinez said, as she walked me out to the waiting area where Emily was sleeping on a bench. "We found evidence that your ex-husband has been planning this for months. He's been surveilling you and your daughter, learning your routines, and building a network of people to help him carry out his plan. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated attempt to commit the perfect murder." The information was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. Frank had always been methodical in his control tactics. planning his emotional abuse carefully to maximize impact while minimizing evidence. It made sense that he would approach murder with the same calculating mindset. As I gently woke Emily and helped her gather her things, I reflected on how much our lives had changed in a single evening. We'd lost Mom's house and discovered the extent of Gerald's betrayal, but we'd also gained something invaluable: complete freedom from Frank's threats and manipulation. For the first time since our marriage began to deteriorate, I could imagine a future without fear. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, insurance claims, and family reconstruction. Mom moved in with us temporarily while she decided whether to rebuild or relocate. Gerald and Joan both pleaded guilty to their charges and received sentences of 5 and 3 years respectively. Frank went to trial and was convicted on all counts, receiving a sentence of 25 years to life. 6 months later, Emily and I were settled into a new routine that felt both strange and wonderful. We'd moved to a larger apartment across town, funded partially by Mom's insurance settlement and partially by my promotion at the hospital. The administrators had been so impressed by how I'd handled the crisis that they'd offered me a supervisory position with better pay and more regular hours. Emily was thriving in her new school, where she'd quickly made friends and earned recognition for her academic achievements. More importantly, she seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her small shoulders. She no longer flinched when the phone rang or worried about unexpected visitors. The constant low-level anxiety that had characterized her behavior since the divorce was finally gone. Mom had decided not to rebuild on Maple Street, choosing instead to buy a smaller house closer to us. She'd struggled with guilt about Gerald's betrayal and her failure to protect us, but therapy was helping her work through those feelings. Our relationship had grown even stronger through the shared trauma, and she'd become an even more devoted grandmother to Emily. The most difficult part of our new life was learning to trust people again. Gerald's betrayal had shaken my faith in family loyalty, while Joan's passive participation had made me question how well I really knew the people around me. But slowly, carefully, we were building new relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and history. Detective Martinez had stayed in touch throughout the legal proceedings, and she'd become something of a mentor to Emily. She'd explained to my daughter how her quick thinking and brave actions had prevented a tragedy, helping Emily understand that she was a hero rather than a victim. The detective had also connected us with other families who'd survived domestic violence, creating a support network that understood our experiences. One evening, as Emily and I were making dinner together in our new kitchen, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, do you think Uncle Gerald really loved us? Or was he just pretending the whole time?" Her voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see the deeper hurt behind the question. I thought carefully before answering, wanting to be honest without destroying her ability to trust family relationships in the future. "I think Gerald did love us, sweetie, but he made terrible choices because he was scared and desperate. Sometimes people we love disappoint us in ways we never expected. That doesn't mean all love is fake, but it does mean we have to be careful about who we trust with our safety." Emily nodded thoughtfully, stirring the pasta sauce with more concentration than the task required. "I'm glad we have each other, Mom, and I'm glad we don't have to be afraid anymore." Her simple statement summed up everything that mattered about our new life. As I tucked Emily into bed that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. We'd survived betrayal, violence, and the destruction of everything familiar. We'd learned that family relationships could be weapons as easily as sources of comfort. But we'd also discovered reserves of strength and courage we didn't know we possessed. The insurance money would help us build a stable future, but the real treasure was our freedom. For the first time in years, I could make plans without considering how Frank might try to sabotage them. Emily could grow up without fear, learning to trust her instincts and speak up when something felt wrong. We could build whatever kind of family we wanted based on love and respect, rather than control and manipulation. That night taught me to trust my instincts and listen to the people who truly love me, no matter how young they are. It showed me that survival isn't just about getting through the immediate crisis. It's about finding the strength to rebuild something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. Most importantly, it proved that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from, but love always finds a way to save us. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own safety? How do you think you would have reacted if you were in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one and appreciate you sharing your thoughts with our community. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming life's biggest challenges. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear it they're stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, trust your instincts, protect the people you love, and never be afraid to ask for help when you need it. You never know when that courage might save your life.